Andy Burnham is still trying to set the agenda with some new eye-catching policies, but he's finding out that as Prime Minister, life comes at you pretty fast. We'll look at some of the challenges he's having to juggle on this episode of Newscast. Hello, Chris is here.
Hi.
And Henry's here.
Hello. Hi. Sorry.
It's been Tell who's been on the early shift for the whole of the Andy Burnham premiership. It's just been one big long shift, actually, for you two, hasn't it?
Felt like it.
Yeah, it has really.
The story today is about the return of the £2 bus cap in England. And so we asked the Department for Transport, what's the longest bus journey and therefore the best value you can get? Any ideas what they came back with?
Ooh.
Well, they actually couldn't tell us directly and specifically, but they gave us some ideas while they're trying to find the actual answer.
I'd be thinking sort of maybe Devon, Cornwall routes, or maybe Northumberland, Yorkshire.
Closer to that end of the country, yeah. Yorkshire, yes.
Oh, about £2 for a long bus journey in Yorkshire. Now this is, I'm allowing myself to drift off into some holiday mode as you do this.
Exactly. I'm doing this as a little treat for you, just to get you through the last few days.
Excellent.
The Coastliner 840 from Leeds to Whitby via York.
Yes, I am familiar with that bus, mainly getting stuck behind it, I think. But that is, and it takes quite a while, I think, that. Because what would it be, 80 miles, something like that?
3 hours, 25 minutes and 14 attractions on the way. So you then read the blurb of this bus. It makes me want to get on it right now. So you can see Castle Howard.
That's terrific.
Which, of course, is famous from Brideshead Revisited. Then you can stop at Yorkshire's food capital, Malton.
Absolutely right.
Then you go to Pickering. Mm-hmm. Lots of lovely shops there.
Hang on a minute. Hang on. There's a bit of fact checking to do it. If you get off the bus, though, you're not going to have to pay another £2 when you get back on it.
Yes, I presume so.
Well, you've just run up a £10 bill already.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Before you buy a organic pork pie in Malton.
Henry, did you know what Chris Mason's specialist subject was on Celebrity Mastermind?
I didn't even know Chris had been on Celebrity Mastermind. Did you win, Chris?
Alas, I was the first loser. I was second. I was let down.
The first loser. That is the phrase of someone who's had to justify this more than once.
My general knowledge rather let me down.
What was the specialist subject then?
The specialist subject was the Yorkshire Dales.
Ah, nice.
So not specifically the bus routes through them, though.
No, and I did well in that round, but because but general, you can't really mug up in short order on general knowledge, and so that unfortunately let me down.
Anyway, when I told a former colleague, as they now are, but a colleague as they were at the Times where I worked before the BBC, that I was joining the BBC. And they'll remain nameless, but they interviewed the Prime Minister in the last few days. They said to me, "That's amazing. You'll get to go on Celebrity Mastermind." That was literally their first reaction. And 3 years on, here I am, and I've never been asked.
It'll happen.
We'll see what we can do. Anyway, we digress. Your specialist subject, you two, for your joint appearance on Newscast is day 3 of Andy Burnham's premiership. So, Henry, how did this story drop that the £2 bus cap is being reintroduced in England?
Well, for the second consecutive day, Adam, I got an email landing in my inbox at about 6 in the morning. And for the second consecutive day, it included a quote from Andy Burnham, the new Prime Minister, using the phrase breathing space. And that has become his mantra as Prime Minister over these 3 days that he has spent in the job so far. And it is a really striking thing that for 2 consecutive days, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's a third and fourth and beyond, Andy Burnham wants the day to be dominated by the sense that he is doing something about what he and so many other politicians say is voters' number one issue, which is the cost of living.
And Chris, just give us the T's and C's for this, because it's not the whole UK, it's England, for example.
It's England, and it is for the calendar year starting next year, so for 2027. And here is Andy Burnham picking up and running with something that he was proud of doing in Greater Manchester. He's talked frequently about how much he loves buses. I think it's as Henry was saying, emphasising that kind of central message of his week around the cost of living, and then it's kind of part of brand Burnham, isn't it? I think that heavy association he has with buses in particular, because what he did with the B network, as it's called, in Greater Manchester. I think he pointedly chose to head west rather than north from London for the launch of this policy, heading to Bath, to stand in front of a bus that had its livery put in place with a big £2 coin and talking about the £2 fare. And this the attempt after yesterday to try and hammer home a message of really leaning into the whole cost of living argument and trying to make an argument that they're trying to make something of a contribution to doing something about it.
Although, Henry, I wonder if that £2 branded bus has just been parked in a garage since the Boris Johnson era.
Well, it is certainly a point that is being made by the Conservatives today, that this was a policy introduced by the Conservatives back in 2023. Initially, by the way, just meant to be temporary and then quickly became permanent, as is often the case with these things. The Conservatives said at the 2024 general election that they wanted to find a way to maintain it. Then Sir Keir Starmer increased the cap to £3 back in 2025. So, look, I think there's an interesting question here about whether, though, as Chris was saying, this has only been introduced by Andy Burnham for the calendar year 2027, whether actually this is going to become a bit like fuel duty has become for the past, 16 years now. One of those government policies which, in theory, is always going to change. In theory, the cap is always going to increase at some point in the future, but in practice, it just becomes politically impossible ever to change it.
And Henry, there's a slightly complicated way for how this is going to be funded.
That's right. And it is, by the way, notable that for the second consecutive day again, a government spending announcement has come with an instantaneous explanation of how this is being funded by spending cuts or spending reprioritisation rather than increased borrowing, because Andy Burnham is certainly very alive to the possibility that they might spook the financial markets if they look like they're being profligate. In this case, he says most of the scheme is being funded by £400 million, which the government was going to invest in climate projects, but he says instead that is going to be a loan, which means that the capital can be spent on this bus policy instead. There's another £50 million or so which is going towards this project, which hasn't been spent, again from Department for Energy Security and Net Zero budgets. And then in addition to that, the government says that there's money that was already allocated for bus policy in the Department for Transport, which is now going to go on sustaining this cap instead.
And also, Chris, just in terms of the devolution point, there's some interesting things going on here because, OK, as you said, Andy Burnham had done this when he was in Greater Manchester, but his ally and neighbour in Liverpool, Steve Rotherham, had also been doing it. And in London, Sadiq Khan has got a cap that's even lower. So I suppose this is sort of taking the good bits of devolution and then applying them everywhere else, he would argue, maybe Andy Burnham?
Yeah, I suppose there's two elements, two doses of this you could pick out of in the last 24 hours. Indeed that, so running with a devolved idea, if you like, and scaling it up. And Andy Burnham, in one of his social media videos, talks about his pride in doing exactly that. And it's a slight tangent from buses in England to a Labour leader in Scotland. Anas Sarwar, the leader of Scottish Labour, due to be made a peer, so put into the House of Lords and become a minister in the Westminster government, which I note that one or two wags have observed is a curious twist on a commitment to devolution, which is to take a prominent leader from the devolved architecture, if you like, of British politics and put them in the Westminster Parliament.
Although I noticed this hasn't happened yet, because you got wind of it on Monday night, and we're recording just after lunchtime on Wednesday, and it still hasn't actually been announced.
It hasn't. So, there was wind of it flying around on Tuesday night. Was it Tuesday night? Yeah, Tuesday night. And the expectation at the time, I was told, certainly by folk north of the border, that there would be official confirmation before the evening was out. Before the 10 o'clock news was on, I did a little bit of chasing to be told from folk rather geographically closer to where I am, that it wasn't coming last night. But they weren't disputing that it's going to happen, but it wasn't coming last night. And here we are as we record it just before 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, and it has still not happened. There are indeed some other ministerial appointments in the lower ranks of government that are still to be, either filled or confirmed that the incumbents are maintaining their roles. But yeah, quite a thing, I think, giving Anas Sarwar a job in government, given how pivotal a figure, frankly, he was in what turned out to be the last 6 months of Keir Starmer's premiership, with that announcement that he made back in February saying that he thought Keir Starmer should resign, that he was dragging Scottish Labour backwards ahead of the devolved elections in May. So that was undeniably a staging post in the demise of Keir Starmer. And it could, on that day, it looked like it for about an hour, it could have been the point that brought him down.
Although, Henry, if we now tot up a little list, who are people who could be accused of not necessarily stabbing Keir Starmer in the back, but putting their shoulders around him and walking him closer towards the exit, who've now got quite plum jobs out of it?
Well, literally the 3 top jobs in government, the great offices of state. The Chancellor, John Healey, served Sir Keir Starmer as his Defence Secretary for almost 2 years, and then at the moment of Keir Starmer's maximum political vulnerability, in the run-up to that Makerfield by-election, resigned, saying that the Prime Minister was unable and the former Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was unwilling to commit the money that he believed was needed to defend the UK. Now, John Healey is very clear that that was a policy-based resignation, but he is an experienced enough politician to have known that that was most likely to be, as it proved, one of the final nails in Keir Starmer's political coffin. And then the Foreign Secretary is Ed Miliband, who did the full 2 years in Sir Keir Starmer's cabinet, but it is widely known that he was the first member of the cabinet some time ago now to go to Keir Starmer and say that his position was unsustainable and that he ought to set a date for his departure. And the Home Secretary is, as it was under Keir Starmer, Shabana Mahmood, who followed not long after Ed Miliband making a similar argument.
And the new Energy Security and Net Zero Secretary, Miata Fambula. Chris, I remember you interviewing her.
Indeed.
Just a few minutes after she'd resigned, because she was one of the first at ministerial level to resign after the local elections.
Indeed so, and was happy to acknowledge on that very day of her keenness for Andy Burnham to have a bright political future. So, yeah, look, these things are there and are very visible. It is also true to say that a decent number of ministers have been cut and paste, if you like, from their previous jobs in the Starmer government into the same job under Andy Burnham. That's unquestionably true. And then, of course, we should see all of this that we're talking about now in the same context as the conversation of 24 hours ago relating to Darren Jones, the former Chief Secretary to the now previous Prime Minister, and indeed a former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and those rather arch post on X talking about the funding, or as he saw it, the lack of clear funding for the VAT cut on domestic electricity bills. To what extent do we see bubblings of the hurt, the pain from some of those within the Labour Party who have found the last couple of days, weeks, months really, really hard, bubbling out, both in short order, but then in the months ahead as well?
And Henry, your old colleague from The Times, Patrick Maguire, who made the gag about you being on Celebrity Masterminds, which you haven't been able to do yet.
Henry, what would be your specialist subject?
Well, I think about this a lot. The sad reality is that it would be British politics. But if that were forbidden...
You're not allowed to do your day job.
I think it would be either the life and career of Rafael Benitez or Peep Show, the seminal Channel 4 series. Obviously, both speak to a completely misspent youth. But,
I wish you good luck in both. You could be on 2 episodes, 2 special subjects. Anyway, the reason I was bringing up Patrick Maguire making that gag in your old office about Celebrity Mastermind is he's been sort of the main author of the theory that this Andy Burnham reshuffle has instantly created a Starmer faction in the Labour Party that hadn't really existed before.
Yeah, I think there is something in that, because those ministers who have been dispensed with have generally been the ones who were most personally committed to Keir Starmer by the end. So, as Chris was saying, there are lots of people in the government continuing in jobs or in different jobs who served Keir Starmer, but the ones who really fought to the end for him are disproportionately the ones from the cabinet, at least, who are gone. I mean, I could have kept going after the great officers of state, by the way, to say that the next traditionally most senior job, Defence Secretary, has gone to Wes Streeting, of course, who was, for a long period of time, the most plausible rival to Keir Starmer. And if Anas Sarwar had got his wish and Keir Starmer had gone in February, well, Andy Burnham wouldn't have been available, and it may well have been Wes Streeting who might have succeeded Keir Starmer at that point. I think, actually, every reshuffle, or every set of government appointments, because this isn't really a reshuffle, it is a new government, every instance where dozens and dozens, in fact more than 100 MPs are either being appointed or being sacked, creates a massive group of the dispossessed, as well as a massive group of the never possessed, the people who thought that they might have got jobs and turn out to discover that they're not going to get jobs, and perhaps were never in line for the kind of jobs that they thought they were in line for. That was true of Keir Starmer's last and indeed first major reshuffle that he did in September 2025. I think there's a strong argument that that was one of the things which stored up a lot of political pain for him. It might well have been worth it to get the right people in the right jobs as he saw it. But you will absolutely, over the coming months and years, be able to trace back particular episodes where things go wrong for Andy Burnham or where he encounters dissent from MPs or groups of MPs. You will absolutely be able to trace that back to the decisions that he's been making over the past couple of days about personnel.
And it is always the case, it's an arithmetic reality that the dispossessed and never possessed add up to a greater total than the given a job crowd. So that's just the reality of it.
If we just park the accusations of rewarding people who were backstabbers or the factionalism stuff for a second, and just look at the appointment of Lord Sarwar as a trade minister. I mean, actually, on its own merits, that is an interesting thing to do, isn't it, Chris? Because the Scottish Labour leader doesn't normally really have a role at a UK level. They've always in the past focused on either being First Minister of Scotland or challenging the First Minister of Scotland. And actually, I just think having a Scottish person doing trade sends an interesting thing about Scotland's role in the Union.
Yeah, I think the expectation is that there would be a contest to find a new Scottish Labour leader once...
so this wouldn't be a timeshare arrangement?
No,
because
not least because you now cannot sit in both parliaments at the same time. So on accepting a seat in the House of Lords, so a seat in Westminster, he would be disqualified from his seat at Holyrood. It doesn't mean, curiously, that there would be a by-election for his seat because he was elected on the regional list, and so it would be the next Labour candidate on the list in his region who would take that seat. We saw a similar thing play out after the Westminster by-election in Aberdeen South, which was won by the Conservatives and then had a knock-on as a result of that. But I think it is. I mean, it's interesting nonetheless. It's interesting in terms of how it goes down with Scottish Labour MPs. Some of them none too pleased that there is a finite number of ministerial jobs available, and here goes one to someone who isn't an MP.
Do you know what? Can I just explain why I made that mistake? Or at least why I think I made that mistake?
Yeah, go on.
I was thinking of the Reform leader in Scotland, Malcolm Offord, Lord Offord, who did it the other way around.
Yes.
And so he resigned his seat in the House of Lords, but he is still Lord Offord because you don't lose your peerage, you just lose your spot in the House of Lords.
Indeed.
I think he took a leave of absence. And the other example, by the way, is the recently departed Welsh First Minister, Eluned Morgan, or as she was known in Westminster before she went to Wales, Baroness Morgan. So I think you can keep your title and also keep the possibility of returning there at some point. But yeah, absolutely.
I'm sensing another little specialist subject rearing its head.
I'm not sure what the second and third and fourth and fifth questions are about that, but let me try.
And there was the two, just whilst we're running with this particular theme, Stephen Flynn and Stephen Gethins, the two former SNP MPs who won seats at Holyrood in May, therefore triggering two Westminster by-elections because they couldn't sit in both parliaments at the same time.
Presumably, though, if Lord Sarwar is appointed to the Lords, if this all happens, he'll be Lord Sarwar of Pollokshields, which is the area of Glasgow he and I grew up in, a few streets away from each other, although we didn't know each other. What you've got here is what Andy Burnham's life is like now this week. So you've got him on the one hand trying to be the Prime Minister who's just come in, the clean sweep, the new broom, announcing eye-catching policies that will help people in their pockets. But at the same time, he's having to just deal with the stuff that gets thrown at prime ministers. For example, this allegations of rewarding people who helped him get into Downing Street. And the second example of that is dealing with gaffes. And there's been a bit of a gaffe involving Wes Streeting and the Home Secretary, Henry.
Yes, that's right. Some people will have seen some of the footage of the cabinet, the new cabinet, before their first meeting as Andy Burnham's cabinet on Tuesday. They were having tea and coffee in the Downing Street garden.
And actually, we can hear a bit of it, and it's quite hard to hear what they're actually saying. But then, Henry, you can do the lip reading thing.
That was utterly unintelligible, wasn't it?
But Henry's going to make it intelligible.
Okay, so that was Wes Streeting, who is now the Defence Secretary, talking to Shabana Mahmood, who remains the Home Secretary, about Alex Norris, who is the new Justice Secretary. And Wes Streeting said of Alex Norris, he is the enemy now. Shabana Mahmood said, no, he's not. And Wes Streeting went on to say, he wants to let them all out, which has been interpreted by some people as a reference to the government's early release scheme. I'm not sure it was that. I think it was a reference to the sort of general joke that is made, sometimes in public, more often in private, between Home Secretaries and Justice Secretaries, about the Home Secretaries being the people whose job it is to lock offenders up, and the Justice Secretary's job being to run a prison system, which of course for most prisoners does ultimately at some point release prisoners.
But unfortunately for those banterers, Chris, this bit of banter in the Downing Street garden runs headlong into a news story which is in the Telegraph, which is about two of the people who were jailed over the death of PC Andrew Harper, the police officer who was dragged behind a car when he'd gone to investigate a burglary. PC Harper's mum was talking to the Telegraph saying, oh, I've just been informed that two of the people who were jailed are probably going to be released early because of the government's reforms to sentencing to reduce the pressure on prison places. And so that bit of banter then it looks one way in the Downing Street garden to the banterers, but then looks another way in the context of what else is going on in the news.
Yeah, and that juxtaposition is clearly unfortunate in a dreadful case, and it prompted the broadcasting of that clip to make clear, as Henry was saying there, that the cameras were invited in to film that cup of tea and coffee that cabinet ministers were having prior to their first meeting of the cabinet under Andy Burnham. So it wasn't like it was leaked or surreptitiously recorded. The politicians there knew that the cameras were there, but we did get apologies from Wes Streeting and Shabana Mahmood, Defence and Home Secretaries respectively, posted on social media talking about there being no ill intent, but recognising the very, very serious issues being talked about. I mean, as I say, clearly the juxtaposition is unfortunate. I think in the interest of proportionality, it's worth reflecting that everyone tends to say, approach conversations in a tone and tenor rather differently when you're chatting informally than you might when you're in some sort of formal kind of presentation. I suspect that kind of happens in every workplace, in every kind of corner of life, really. But yeah, the apology is perhaps inevitable, particularly given that context.
Now, one of the other things Andy Burnham is having to get used to is clarifying his own remarks. For example, one he did in an interview on the eve of becoming Prime Minister, where he said the thing he kept on hearing when he was campaigning in Makerfield was people complaining about the freeze on the tax-free allowance for income tax. And actually, we went back into the archives, the recent archives, and found that question time he did in Makerfield with Fiona Bruce, where there was a very angry woman in the audience who was angry about this.
What my question is, Reform having their manifesto, they're going to raise the tax threshold. Why is that not in your manifesto? Because if you put that in your manifesto, you'll walk this by-election easy.
You're right, okay.
You need to put that in your... if not for everybody,
you heard it here.
For pensioners.
And then, Henry, just remind us how Andy Burnham got this hair running a few days ago.
Well, he gave an interview on the eve of becoming Prime Minister in which he said the biggest frustration he heard from the voters of Makerfield was about the personal allowance. So it wasn't completely clear from the quote whether he was talking about just low-income workers talking about feeling overtaxed or whether it was specifically about the personal allowance, which is the amount of money you receive before you start having to pay income tax, and it's been frozen at £12,750 since 2021. But if you raise that essentially unprompted as the incoming Prime Minister, as the number one frustration of a constituency where you've said that the test of everything you're going to do is how would it go down in that constituency, Makerfield, well, you are going to set more than one hair running. So it is interesting that Andy Burnham has mostly walked it back, but not entirely. I mean, he talked today about how it is something that it might be looked at in the context of the budget this autumn. I don't think it was ever plausible that it would be looked at before the budget, given what we've talked about before about Andy Burnham being wary of being seen to make unfunded spending commitments or unfunded commitments on tax. So, look, I think it is a very interesting sign of his instincts, though I think we're still quite unclear how his instincts, publicly declared as they often are, translate into government policy.
And that's the fascinating thing, isn't it? To what extent do Team Burnham conclude that this sort of thought, if you like, over the last 3 or 4 days was a mistake and that they were ill-disciplined and they shouldn't have done it? Or does it become more of the strategy that he's willing to sort of talk openly about the concerns that he hears whilst not necessarily being able to at least instantly address them? And the curiosity with this the really curious thing with this was that this was an eve of becoming a Prime Minister interview, packed with colour and a kind of sense of Andy Burnham, the man, etc., on the eve of the sort of biggest week of his professional life. And the interview would have been perfectly readable without this detail. And in it appears on a specific idea, albeit the specifics within the specific were still vague in terms of what he would do. Then on Monday, when he invited the Prime Minister, a few of us, into the Downing Street garden for a couple of questions from journalists, he sort of half walked back from it while still sort of saying he was keen on it, talking about how difficult it would be, followed by where we were by last night and then to this morning on camera, him saying that there's no commitment. So yeah, it's just really interesting. Does he carry on doing this or does he rein it in?
I'm just thinking though, Chris, from thinking back to when I was reading that Patrick Maguire interview. This is now about the 14th time we've quoted him in this podcast. He's got his own. That it's because Andy Burnham himself then says in the interview, I don't want people to think I just want to put up taxes. I'm also looking for places where I can do a tax cut. And of course, unfreezing the income tax threshold at the bottom end would effectively be a tax cut for some people. And so it's not just that it came out of his mouth by accident. It was in the context of him trying to present himself as a maybe more balanced person when it came to tax and spend.
Yeah, absolutely. He was trying to reframe how he was perceived, wasn't he? I'm just reading the quote here. They're just characterising me as a tax raiser, he sighed. Well, again, it's never that simplistic, is it? Now, I suppose in his defence, he then had his idea about the VAT cut, which is a tax cut and is happening, as opposed to this personal allowance idea that was kind of floated and then it floated out to sea and then floated back to harbour. So it's just interesting, isn't it? When given how incredibly careful the last two prime ministers were in all of their public utterances, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, to the point sometimes where you came away, or certainly I did, having interviewed both of them many times, wondering what you had, and sometimes realising there wasn't a vast amount. Does Andy Burnham think that there is a merit in speaking, leaning into these things that he hears, whether it's on Question Time or anywhere else, and floating something as an aspiration, etc., or does that just end up look like you're commentating?
And I was just thinking, as I was crouched down in Downing Street on Monday, watching Andy Burnham walking into Downing Street and doing his no-note speech and saying he was going to do things differently. And I did just think, wasn't Keir Starmer trying to do this too? He didn't want to play the game by the normal rules, but the rules came and got him in the end, Henry.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there are conversations that you can see have taken place in Andy Burnham's team about ways to do things less traditionally, different use of social media, that pick up on some themes that were developing under Keir Starmer. But whatever media you use to communicate, whatever time of day you make your big announcements, one thing is recurrent, which is if you say things as Prime Minister that could potentially amount to really serious policy and you then walk them back, that is significant.
Now, we've just got time for this. Henry, your dream is coming true. You're doing a rip-off edition of Celebrity Mastermind.
Is it
here
general
on
knowledge?
Newscast. No, specialist.
Oh, I came up with those subjects out of nowhere. This is going to be very
they came
embarrassing.
from somewhere. They came from your subconscious, which is, I'm told, the best way to choose your specialist subject. So here we go. I will ask a question and then Chris will ask a question. So there's a total of 2 points.
No,
up for
this is
grabs.
like a literal nightmare. This is like something that you would wake up from at 3:30 in the morning.
No,
Adam
this-
Fleming was asking me questions about Rafa Benitez and I couldn't remember any of the answers.
Yeah, this is actually the end of your early shift and you've fallen asleep in the office. So this is a dream. Right, okay. Which club did Rafael Benitez join after leaving Liverpool in 2010?
Inter Milan.
Correct.
What was the name of Rafael Benitez's long-term assistant manager at Valencia and Liverpool, whose departure from Merseyside in 2007 left Benitez, quote, quietly furious?
Paco Ayestaran.
Oh, correct. Correct. 2 out of 2.
And your time is up.
Ah, fantastic. It wasn't a nightmare, it was a dream.
Yay. Only another, what, would you have to get 12 points to match my record?
You've been on it as well.
Yes.
Have you been on it as well? I didn't know that.
What was your specialist subject?
The Roger Moore James Bond films.
Oh, nice.
Every
And how
school
did you do, Adam? Did you win?
I mean, yes. Which is good because I raised money for charity.
And you beat me on Paddy McGuinness's weakest link quiz as well. Oh, dear, I'm 2-0 down here.
I wonder what's a quiz we could all go on.
The newscast Christmas. Dude.
Actually, maybe we do need a quiz format. That's something to ponder. Right. I'll let you guys go and ponder what's happening in politics because we've run out of time. So I'll see you guys later. And that's all for this episode of Newscast. A reminder, you can listen to us every single day of the week on BBC Sounds. And we will be back with another episode of Newscast very soon. Bye-bye.